When Timothy brought back the reality he had inadvertently altered, the ripples of his actions reached far beyond his own understanding, touching the lives of many, including his siblings, Romeo and Scarlett. In this new world, they found themselves in a seemingly untouched version of their lives, one free from the chaos and tumultuous history they had known. Their home, once a place of safety, now stood grandly in a pristine, almost surreal form. The golden walls, adorned with intricate moldings, gleamed under the chandelier's light as it shimmered like distant stars. The marble floors, polished to a blinding sheen, gave the illusion of being crafted from the finest crown jewels. Yet, beneath the perfection of their surroundings, an underlying tension simmered, the result of a tragedy that would forever alter their paths. The tragedy began with the devastating news of their father's untimely death, a blow that shattered their mother. Overcome with grief and unable to cope with the weight of her loss, she fell into the embrace of addiction. Slowly, her reliance on drugs deepened, her need for them growing with each passing day, until one fateful night, she disappeared without a trace. The absence of her presence was like an echo in the empty house, where the silence grew deafening, and the once vibrant home felt hollow. At just 10 years old, Romeo and Scarlett were left alone, their lives reduced to a fragile existence. Their meals were sparse, often scavenging what little remained in the refrigerator as they tried to survive in the wake of their mother's departure. Days turned into weeks, and the hardness of their situation did not go unnoticed by the concerned neighbors. Whispers began to circulate, the first signs of something being terribly wrong next door. The absence of school uniforms and the eerie stillness of the house sent waves of suspicion throughout the neighborhood. Soon, the whispers grew louder, and the authorities were contacted. The revelation of their mother's addiction painted her in a cruel light, neglectful, weak, and irresponsible. Her reputation crumbled under the weight of public judgment, and before long, the siblings were taken from their home and placed into the foster care system, torn from each other's arms in the process. The separation was a devastating blow. Romeo, a boy consumed by the loss of his family, wandered the streets of Harlem in search of something, anything, that could fill the void. He clung to the hope that he would somehow reconnect with the father he had never truly known and the mother he desperately longed to find again. His days were spent caught in the cycle of trouble, running into the police, who seemed to shadow his every move. On the other hand, Scarlett retreated into herself. She buried her pain beneath a facade of composure, blending into the background at school. While she seemed distant and cold to the outside world, beneath the surface, she harbored a deep, gnawing pain, a darkness that seeped into her every thought and action. She didn't just want to wish away her troubles. She wanted to erase the part of herself that reminded her of her absent mother. Years passed, each one brimming with its brand of heartache and longing. When they turned 15, a surprising change came, an unexpected adoption by a wealthy family, who offered the siblings a chance at a new life. The siblings were whisked away from the grim foster homes and placed into a sprawling mansion perched high on a hill. The grandeur of their new home, with its towering pillars and sweeping staircases, was an overwhelming sight. However, both Romeo and Scarlett felt an unsettling sense of displacement. They could not shake the feeling that this sudden shift in their lives was not born from kindness, but from something else, a hidden agenda or perhaps some darker force they couldn't quite comprehend. Their meager belongings, hastily packed into a car, seemed insufficient to fill the vast emptiness of their new home. Scarlett, who had learned to keep her emotions in check, couldn't help but smile at the possibilities that this new life might offer. It was hard not to be captivated by the luxury that surrounded them, the paintings on the walls, each piece more exquisite than the last, the mirrors that reflected the sunlight streaming through the grand windows, illuminating every corner of the house. Even the bathrooms, with their high-tech toilets that rose gracefully at the touch of a button, seemed like something out of a dream. Scarlett imagined what mysteries lay in the rooms on the second and third floors, her anticipation growing with each step. As the siblings were led further into the house, a man, who had helped unload their bags, guided them toward the main living room. Their eyes widened with awe as they entered. The room was filled with warmth and familial energy. The father, a man in his 60s, with laughter lines etched into his face, bounded up from a plush couch with an exuberance that felt oddly out of place in the opulent surroundings. His graying hair, slightly tousled, framed his face, and his brown eyes twinkled with an unsettling kindness. His polo shirt strained to contain the modest potbelly that he tried to hide with a casual stance. Next to him sat a younger woman, possibly in her 20s, her sun-kissed skin and striking red lips standing out in stark contrast to the somber atmosphere of the room. She lounged casually in a bikini, a sun hat tilted over her eyes, while the family's son sat beside her. His attire, a sharp blue coat, seemed out of place, but his pale, delicate features were the most striking. His dark blue eyes were deep and mysterious, almost too fragile, as if he had never known hardship in his life. The father's voice shattered the moment of silence, raspy and unsettling as it broke through the tension. "Welcome," he said warmly, though his words carried an undercurrent that sent a chill through both Romeo and Scarlett. Romeo, always the more guarded of the two, managed a small smile, but Scarlett, growing bolder in this unfamiliar space, took it upon herself to speak. "Hello, and thank you for adopting us," she began, though before she could explain their tumultuous journey, the father asked an odd question, his tone curious, almost too casual. "How do you spell your last name?" "Vulu," Romeo replied, his face scrunched in confusion. The father's reaction was jarring. He burst into loud, infectious laughter, his amusement not matching the gravity of the situation. "This is them, honey. You know we've been trying to find you for quite some time," he said, his eyes narrowing as though he saw something deeper, something neither Romeo nor Scarlett could fathom. The two siblings exchanged uncertain glances. Scarlett's mind raced, her thoughts a tangle of confusion and suspicion. Was this man a long-lost relative? Or had he somehow known their family's history in ways they couldn't understand? Romeo's attention, however, was drawn to their stepbrother, his delicate, almost fragile demeanor, who was drifting in and out of sleep on the couch. Seeing their confusion, the father gave a reassuring smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I know this is a lot for you to take in right now, so let me show you to your room," he said, gesturing toward the grand staircase with an unsettling air of familiarity. Romeo and Scarlett followed, each step deeper into the house only pulling them further into a mystery they were ill-prepared to unravel. As the old man led them upstairs, he paused at the top of the staircase to turn and introduce himself, a warm smile spreading across his weathered face. "My name's Ben," he said, gesturing toward the hall in a welcoming manner. The modest decor of the room spoke of simple elegance, yet it was imbued with an undeniable comfort, the kind that made you feel instantly at ease. He continued, mentioning his wife, Destiny, and their son, Jeremy, both of whom he spoke of with a quiet, almost reverent pride. "They're good people," he added, his voice tinged with affection. "You can call on us whenever you need anything," he chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Then, with a final nod, he stepped out of the room, leaving Romeo and Scarlett alone to absorb the strange new world they had suddenly entered. Romeo wandered over to the bed on the right side of the room, sinking down into its soft embrace. His fingers brushed the plush comforter, and he closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the stillness. He opened his eyes to survey the room. The dresser was neat and orderly, a collection of small trinkets arranged with care. A navy blue carpet, thick and soft underfoot, muffled his every movement. His gaze drifted to the window, where the first light of dusk streamed in, casting long shadows across the room. A quiet smile crept onto his lips, and he let out a sigh of relief. "This is a nice home," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet appreciation. He kicked his feet back, sinking further into the softness of the pillow, letting the weight of his exhaustion wash over him. Scarlett, on the other hand, moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency. She made her way to the bed on the left side of the room, her purse hanging from one shoulder. The faint click of the bag being placed on the nightstand was the only sound breaking the silence between them. Her eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a slight frown as she scanned the room. "I don't know how long we're going to stay here," she said, her voice laced with skepticism. "But don't get too comfortable. There's something off with these people." Her tone was sharp, as if she were already bracing for something to go wrong. Romeo turned his head toward her, his curiosity piqued. "He said he was trying to find us," he said, his voice betraying a touch of uncertainty. "Do you think he knows Dad?" He looked down, chewing the inside of his cheek as a slow unease crept up his spine. Scarlett fell silent, her brow furrowed in thought. The room felt suddenly heavy with the weight of that unspoken question. Both of them felt it, the idea that Ben, this stranger, might know more than he let on. That somehow, this family might be connected to their father, or their mother, in a way they hadn't yet fully understood. The unsettling idea lingered in the air like a faint whisper. Despite the unease, the thought of having a roof over their heads, of escaping the cold, unrelenting void of uncertainty that had marked their lives for so long, offered a small measure of comfort. For the moment, it would have to be enough. That night, as the silence of the house settled over them, Romeo and Scarlett fell into an uneasy, restless sleep. The weight of their thoughts pressed on them, but neither disturbed the other as the house seemed to breathe around them. The next morning, their fragile peace was shattered by the chaotic sounds of barking that echoed from outside. Romeo's eyes snapped open, his curiosity piqued. He pushed himself out of bed and crossed to the window, peering out to see a surreal sight: 7 Azawak dogs, long-limbed and elegant, frolicking in the garden below. Their strange, elongated bodies and sharp, angular features made them look almost otherworldly as they darted between the garden's delicate flowers, trampling them beneath their paws. Romeo's lips parted in surprise. "That's the most messed-up-looking dog I've ever seen. Why is its body shaped like that?" he said, a mix of amusement and repulsion in his voice. Scarlett groaned from her bed, rolling over and pulling the covers over her head in an attempt to block out the noise. Romeo, undeterred, grinned mischievously. "I'm going to go mess with them," he declared, not waiting for a response. With a swift movement, he swung open the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving it slightly ajar behind him. Scarlett, her patience stretched thin, sighed in resignation and followed him, closing the door with a soft click. A thought crossed her mind as she followed him down the hall, a thought that sent a shiver down her spine. This is my new life now. The walls, bathed in warm gold tones, and the polished marble floors gave the house an air of opulence, but Scarlett felt no comfort in their beauty. The clatter of the dogs outside, the sounds of wealth that permeated every corner, grated on her senses. She felt out of place in this world of perfection, as though she had been thrust into a reality that didn't belong to her. Suddenly, a faint scratching sound caught her attention. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but persistent. It seemed to be coming from somewhere behind the walls. Scarlett paused before getting out the bed, her brow furrowing as the noise continued, a quiet, unsettling rhythm. She dismissed it at first, but the nagging feeling wouldn't let go. Perhaps it was nothing, but then again, perhaps it wasn't. She made a mental note to mention it at dinner later that evening. Maybe it would explain something, anything, about this strange place. Dinner was an uncomfortable affair. The air in the dining room was thick with an unspoken tension. Ben sat at the head of the table, his posture rigid, exuding an air of authority that seemed to settle over the room like a heavy cloak. Destiny sat at the opposite end, her face an unreadable mask. Jeremy, who Romeo and Scarlett had initially expected to sit next to them, was positioned further away, a subtle but unsettling sign of the complex family dynamics at play. Ben, as if sensing the need for formality, cleared his throat before speaking. "I want us all to bow our heads and take a moment to pray," he said, his voice low but commanding. The room fell silent as everyone complied, heads lowering in unison. But as Ben's voice began to deepen, taking on a gravity that felt almost unnatural, Scarlett's heart began to race. There was something about his tone, something off, that made her skin prickle with unease. Ben's words became more ominous. "Gratitude, Father, for bringing these 2 wonderful children back into my family's life once more." Romeo turned his head slightly to glance at his sister, sensing her unease. Her fingers drummed restlessly on the table, her eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape. "They don't know it yet, but they were brought into this world to complete the impossible that no one else would dare to attempt," Ben continued, his smile widening, revealing an unsettling familiarity in his eyes. "For Father, I know this beautiful young girl thinks she's an ordinary person, but she holds a genetic power that cannot be explained. And the same goes for this boy." His gaze lifted, and for a brief moment, his eyes locked with theirs. The air in the room seemed to grow colder. Scarlett's stomach churned, and Romeo's breath caught in his throat as they exchanged a look. A dark, heavy realization began to dawn on them. Ben wasn't just a stranger. He wasn't merely some kindly benefactor. He was someone who knew far more about them than they were willing to admit. A shadow of their past loomed in the air, and the sense that they were being drawn into something much larger, something far more dangerous, took root in their minds. In that moment, they both recalled fragments of childhood stories, of a mysterious ancestral heritage tied to Africa, tales of power that seemed too fantastical to be true. Their mother had spoken of it in whispers, with reverence and fear. But now, sitting at this table, it all seemed far too real, too relevant. They weren't just caught in a strange new family. They were at the cusp of something much deeper, a legacy steeped in ancient secrets, a power beyond their understanding, and a fate neither of them was prepared for. Out of nowhere, Jeremy, the son, let out a subtle sigh and rolled his eyes, a flicker of exasperation passing over his face like a cloud dimming the sun. He glanced sidelong at Romeo and offered a small, conspiratorial smile, one of those silent exchanges only siblings or close companions could decipher. Romeo returned it with a quick smirk before refocusing on his plate, where a heap of unidentifiable meat sat like a challenge issued by some culinary underworld. He poked at it gingerly, the glossy surface catching the light in a way that made his stomach turn. His appetite, once promising, was now smothered beneath the weight of curiosity and mild dread. Across the table, Scarlett mirrored Romeo's hesitation. Her fork hovered above the platter, twitching slightly as she inspected the meat, its texture fibrous and veined with an oily sheen that shimmered in hues too unnatural to be comforting. Both siblings shared a look, mutual confusion tinged with unease. The taste, when they dared a bite, was just as unsettling, foreign, earthy, almost metallic, with an aftertaste that lingered like smoke in the back of their throats. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, and it left behind a strange numbness that neither of them could shake. "So, what do you guys do for fun?" Jeremy asked suddenly, breaking the thick silence as he leaned forward, his tone bright and casual, too casual. He flashed a friendly grin that felt like a paper-thin veneer masking the awkwardness of the moment. In near-perfect unison, Scarlett and Romeo turned their heads toward him. The movement was so synchronized it felt orchestrated, like the mirrored hands of a double-sided clock ticking forward in eerie harmony. Jeremy blinked, a little taken aback. "I just work," Scarlett said flatly, her eyes dropping back to her plate. Her brow furrowed slightly, not just in frustration but as if the very presence of the meal offended her, like it was a cruel joke she wasn't privy to. "I smoke weed," Romeo added cheerfully, as if the air hadn't shifted at all. He nodded with enthusiasm, almost theatrically, as though his philosophy of life needed punctuation. Scarlett stopped mid-bite. Her fork hovered. Her eyes narrowed as a faint sound, almost imperceptible, pricked her ears. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice low and uncertain. She scanned the table, looking for signs that someone else had noticed. Destiny, sitting across from her with an air of calm detachment, nodded without lifting her head. "We all do," she said, cutting into her food with ease. "It's the old pipes. They act up now and then. Nothing we can do about it. This house was built weird." But Scarlett couldn't shake the sensation that something was off. The sound didn't feel mechanical, it felt alive, as though it slithered behind the walls with intent. She stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly against the hardwood. "I'm going to use the restroom," she muttered, already walking away. As she ascended the creaking staircase, the sound grew louder, more layered. It wasn't just pipes anymore. It was something deeper, something pulsing. Each step felt like it echoed into a hollow, unseen chamber. The second floor greeted her with a hallway cloaked in shadow, the lights dim and flickering. She ran her fingertips along the cool plaster walls, which trembled faintly under her touch. Then it happened. A sudden rush of vision surged behind her eyes, a flash, electric and wild. A strange blue light flickered in the corner of her mind, first as a single orb, then splitting, multiplying. 2, 5, dozens, hundreds. They danced like stars in a midnight storm, twirling and pulsing in sync with her heartbeat, then bursting outward in a dazzling display that left her breathless. She gasped and yanked her hand away from the wall. The sound stopped. Silence fell like a heavy blanket, suffocating and immediate. Her heart thundered in her chest as she pushed open her bedroom door and stepped inside. She paused, glanced over her shoulder. Nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched coiled around her like a cold fog. She shut the door with more force than necessary, then leaned back against it, chest rising and falling with sharp, ragged breaths. Her skin prickled. Then, from the corner of her eye, movement. A bird landed on her window. But it was no ordinary bird. It staggered clumsily onto the sill, its wings spreading out in a way that felt more threat than flourish. Its feathers shimmered an unnatural blue, vivid and predatory, with a lion-like texture that seemed to ripple with each breath. Its eyes, bottomless, locked onto hers with a calculating intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. They were eyes that didn't just see, they understood. Scarlett took a cautious step forward. The bird tilted its head, mimicking her movement in a disturbingly human gesture. As she got closer, the color of its feathers shifted subtly from blue to purple, as though absorbing the ambient energy of the room. Then came the tap. A gentle, deliberate knock of its beak against the glass. Tap, tap, and then it was gone, soaring into the fading light like a wraith on wings, vanishing beyond the horizon. But the dread remained. Scarlett turned and froze. In the corner of her room stood a creature she could not name, could not process. It was shaped like a man, tall and broad, but its head was distinctly that of a dog, elongated snout, sharp ears, and eyes that burned with feral intelligence. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. It merely was. And then, gone. The room was empty once again, but the air felt poisoned by its presence. Now I find myself gripped by the unraveling mystery before me, as if the fabric of reality itself has started to fray around the edges. That blue light, her light, has appeared before. I've seen it. Long ago, in a place now buried by time and myth, it radiated from an artifact held by Celotus, the lost brother. The fourth. The fallen. Betrayed and sealed within the belly of a serpent, locked away with other ancient forces the world was never meant to remember. That light was once his. And now, it calls to her. There's no mistaking it anymore. Scarlett is more than she knows, more than we ever could have imagined. And the power that stirs behind her eyes may be the key to unlocking the fourth elemental force that has lain dormant for generations. But power like that does not awaken quietly, and neither do those who seek to claim it. Meanwhile, Scarlett was upstairs, her thoughts a tempest, each one colliding with the next like storm-tossed waves. Her hands trembled as she gripped the sides of the porcelain sink in the upstairs washroom, staring into her own reflection as if trying to recognize herself. What was truly happening? Her breath fogged the mirror slightly, distorting her face just enough to match the strange visions that had begun to haunt her. Flashes of unknown faces, echoes of whispers in foreign tongues, shadows that danced where none should have been. Downstairs, her brother Romeo sat at the long dining table, the room dim except for the golden flicker of the chandelier above. The remnants of dinner lay scattered, crumpled napkins, silverware slightly askew, plates smudged with the last traces of wine sauce and roasted root vegetables. Their servant moved quietly, like a ghost herself, clearing away the remnants of the meal until Jeremy was left alone, save for one other, Romeo, sitting stiffly across from him, the silence settling heavy between them like dust. Jeremy broke it first, his voice sharp and oddly casual. "My father's been obsessed with your family for a long time," he mused, a cigar dangling lazily between his fingers. He lit it with a practiced flick, the flame briefly illuminating the thoughtful creases in his brow before he inhaled deeply and let the smoke swirl around them like a spectral mist. Romeo leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, curiosity tinged with suspicion. Jeremy smirked, a glint in his eye as he passed the cigar across the table, the smoke now curling like whispered secrets between them. "He used to tell me that our grandfather wasn't really our grandfather, but a bow hag." He gestured dramatically with his fingers, as if conjuring the very image. Romeo's brow furrowed, his mind racing to keep up with the tale as he accepted the cigar and took a tentative puff. The smoke clawed at his lungs, and he coughed harshly, the sound echoing too loudly in the still room. Jeremy, undeterred, leaned in. "A boho is a black witch," he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "They feed off living energy, like vampires, but more insidious. Some know what they are, others, they don't." Romeo glanced at him, eyes wide with disbelief, but Jeremy wasn't done. "Like your grandmother," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "She supposedly stole my grandfather's body, lived in it, as a white man, until the day she died." Romeo froze, the story sinking into his bones like ice water. He stared at Jeremy, trying to decipher truth from madness. "You don't actually believe that, right?" he asked finally, voice tight. Jeremy met his eyes for a long moment, then burst into laughter, a short, sharp sound. "Nah," he said with a shrug, snuffing out the cigar. "Just something he used to say." He rose from his chair and walked away, leaving Romeo drowning in unease. But something in Jeremy's laughter rang hollow, like a bell too long buried. Alone now, Romeo rubbed at his eyes, which had begun to itch fiercely. The sensation intensified into a burning sting, and tears welled up unbidden. As he blinked rapidly, trying to clear his vision, the whites of his eyes took on a pinkish, unnatural hue. And then, through the watery haze, he saw her. "Mother!" he croaked, breath catching in his throat. She stood before him, gaunt, solemn, but unmistakably her. Her eyes bore into his with aching familiarity, yet her expression was blank, otherworldly. Then, as if caught in a gust of wind, she vanished. In her place, Jeremy reappeared, but something was wrong. Jeremy's body began to shift, his posture bending into a grotesque hunch. His spine contorted with sickening cracks, and his fingers elongated, nails becoming thick, jagged claws that dug into his flesh. As he tore at his skin, it peeled away like parchment soaked in blood, revealing sinew and raw, pulsing muscle beneath. Romeo pushed back from the table, chair screeching against the floor. He stood frozen in horror, his body locking up as if seized by invisible chains. The figure now in front of him, no longer Jeremy, was monstrous. Stripped of skin, its face was a grotesque mask of exposed tissue, teeth protruding like jagged shards. Its red eyes glowed with ancient malice, fixed unblinkingly on Romeo. And then it spoke. "The children of Vulu don't deserve the power of Celotus," it said, its voice an abomination, deep, reverberating, layered with something not quite human. The room grew darker, as though the shadows had thickened. The creature loomed over Romeo, its massive, distorted head tilting unnaturally. Each word it spoke seemed to ripple the very air. "All my life," it rasped, "I wondered what you creatures were like." It sniffed, lips curling back into a rictus grin. "And now I see you for what you are. Nothing but a shattered glass cup, lost inside another cup." Then it laughed, a wild, high-pitched sound like a hyena's scream, echoing off the walls and worming its way into Romeo's mind. Paralyzed, trembling, Romeo could feel the edges of reality bending. The room was no longer their dining hall. It felt ancient, distorted, and alive. The very air seemed to whisper, pulsing with a magic long forgotten, or perhaps never understood. Upstairs, Scarlett clutched the sink tighter, her head suddenly snapping up. She heard the laughter too. Romeo's heart thundered in his chest, each frantic beat echoing the panic that enveloped him like a suffocating shroud. The creature's gaze bore into him with a malevolence that felt almost palpable, as if it were reaching deep within him to siphon away his fear, stealing the very essence of his dread like a shadowy thief in the dead of night. Sweat trickled down his forehead, mixing with the warm tears that streamed down his cheeks, each droplet heavy and relentless, resembling grains of wheat falling to the ground, weighty and abundant. He felt as though he were adrift in an immense chasm of despair, ensnared in a darkness so profound that the prospect of escape seemed like a distant dream. Then, in a shocking display, the creature retracted its entire form, the skin it wore hanging loosely from its distorted physique, creating a grotesque parody of a human silhouette. With an unsettling grace that belied its nightmarish appearance, it began to peel away the layers of its disguise. Each movement was fluid, almost hypnotic, as it crept across the table toward the paralyzed boy. The contrast between its elegance and its horrifying demeanor sent a chill down Romeo's spine, amplifying his terror as he remained frozen, unable to look away from the impending confrontation. As it approached Romeo, the creature moved with a predatory grace, its elongated limbs gliding silently through the air. It leaned down until its grotesque face was mere inches from his, the chilling proximity sending an icy grip of fear clutching at his heart. Its skin was reminiscent of worn leather, stretched tautly over a skeletal frame, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent curiosity, glinting in the dim light like shards of broken glass. Drawing even closer, it crept to his ear, the mere brush of its breath sending a wave of dread surging through him. In a voice that echoed with both tantalizing allure and bone-chilling terror, it whispered cryptic words that slithered into his mind, promising the revelation of secrets buried so deep that their very existence was an affront to nature. Solu. Each syllable dripped with an unnerving intimacy, wrapping around his thoughts like a vine constricting its prey. The atmosphere thickened, and Romeo's eyes transformed, a brilliant shade of crimson igniting within them, glowing with a fierce intensity. As the weight of despair grasped at his heart, tears began to well up, but they were not the normal guise of sorrow. They flowed like liquid darkness, their color a stark representation of death intertwined with despair. Slowly, the creature lifted its head and regarded him with a twisted satisfaction before turning away, its grotesque form fading into the shadows. It had come to fulfill its purpose, driven to collect what remained of the last bloodline of Vulu, an offering steeped in darkness and despair. But something about the upstairs felt wrong, not in any overt or obvious way, but in the subtle, skin-prickling shift of atmosphere, the kind of unease that crept under the skin like cold fog. The moment Scarlett stepped into the small, cluttered room, her breath hitched in her chest. The air had changed. Heavier, denser. It pressed against her ribs like invisible hands. It was as though something unseen was breathing with her, a presence not bound by flesh, but alive nonetheless. The room seemed to pulse, slow and rhythmic, like an unseen heart swelling and contracting in the walls, just beyond reach. Dust floated lazily through a shaft of moonlight spilling in from the window, and even that felt deliberate, too deliberate, like she was being watched through the air itself. But the most disconcerting thing was the mirror. It stood in the far corner, half covered by an old bedsheet that had slipped down one side, exposing the dark, streaked glass like a wound in the room. Scarlett tried to ignore it, but her eyes kept flicking to it, drawn by movement she wasn't making. Reflected within the mirror's warped surface was a figure, blurry and undefined, mimicking her pace as she crossed the room. Yet every time she turned around, fast, heart thudding, there was nothing. Only stillness. Only absence. Nothing but the breath of shadows and the echo of something her mind refused to name. It wasn't just an illusion. It felt deliberate, like the room itself was teasing her, challenging her to spot what wasn't truly there. She climbed into her bed, heart pounding, curling herself tightly under the quilt, but the blankets brought no comfort. Her body was tense, every muscle pulled taut with anticipation. Her thoughts raced. Where was her brother? He hadn't checked on her. He hadn't made a sound. The worry clutched her like a vice. And then, a voice. Sharp. Urgent. Unmistakably real. Get out. Run away while you still can. It sliced through the silence like a blade. The sound reverberated in her ears, louder than thought, louder than reason. Scarlett bolted upright in bed, eyes wide, gasping. Her breath hitched as she frantically searched the room. Her gaze darted to the closet, the mirror, the corners where the light didn't reach. Who said that? She whispered to the dark, voice trembling. But no answer came. Only silence. Suffocating. Complete. Driven by a cocktail of confusion and dread, she tore herself from the bed, spinning in frantic circles, stumbling across the floorboards, which groaned beneath her like old bones. Her knees gave out, and she collapsed to the ground, her palms scraping across the cold wood. She looked up, shaking, but the room remained unchanged, unmoved. A blank, mocking canvas. Her breath quickened, panic fluttering in her chest like caged wings. The edges of her reality had begun to blur, to fray. She pressed a hand to her temple, eyes filling with tears. Then, another voice. But not like the first. This one was softer, deeper. Not from within the house, but from somewhere beyond it. Something older, wiser. Leave. Now. Go before it seals you in. It came like a prayer, a divine whisper carried on an unseen wind. And this time, she listened. With trembling limbs and a pounding heart, Scarlett scrambled to her feet and rushed to the door. Her hand touched the knob. It was icy cold, as though the metal itself resisted her escape. She turned it anyway, forcing it open. The hallway greeted her with a surreal and horrifying distortion. What should have been a short corridor had stretched impossibly long, twisting and winding like the elongated neck of some ancient beast. The wallpaper peeled in thin curls, and the floorboards groaned under her weight, almost reluctant to hold her. The staircase was gone. Her breath caught. She blinked. Looked again. Still gone. Her throat tightened with panic. She took a step back. Was she still in her house? Everything around her looked familiar, but only just. Like it had been reconstructed from memory, almost right, but eerily off. Suddenly, movement caught her eye. She turned her head. Ben. He stood just a few feet away, at the end of the unnatural hallway. His head was cocked to one side, eyes wide with unsettling curiosity, and his lips twisted into a grotesque smile that reached his eyes. His arms hung unnaturally low, his posture off, too slack, too rubbery, like his bones didn't quite belong to him anymore. "Is everything okay, darling?" he asked sweetly, voice lilting with an exaggerated calm. The word darling dripped from his mouth like spoiled honey. Scarlett's body stiffened. Her lips parted, but no words came. She tried to speak, to scream, but her instincts slammed on the brakes. Her soul recognized something her mind didn't want to accept. She swallowed hard, trying to disguise the terror rising in her chest. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to hide, to vanish, but she stood frozen in place, the hallway stretching infinitely behind her, and Ben smiling just inches ahead. "I'm just going down to see my brother," she managed to say, the tremor in her voice betraying the anxiety coursing through her veins. Ben let out a low chuckle, leaning his head down ever so slightly before snapping it back up, his expression shifting as he leaned closer, the warmth in his tone growing rough and menacing. "You don't have to do that, sweetheart. Your brother just fell asleep on the couch. I think you should just leave him alone." The sweetness of his voice morphed into a chilling command, and he raised an arm, pointing toward the door to signal her to return to her room. The ghost of his former smile had vanished, leaving behind an unsettling vacancy. "Where is the staircase?" "I need to see my brother," she asked, her confidence wavering but a new determination simmering beneath her fear. She locked eyes with Ben, defiance flaring within her. As he took a calculated step forward, she instinctively retreated, putting 2 steps of distance between them, ready to bolt at a moment's notice. He scrutinized her intensely, as if weighing the threat she posed. With both hands clasped at his sides, he widened his stance, showing no intention of letting her pass. They stood in that eerie tableau, locked in a tense standoff, each waiting for the other to make a move. The silence between them was thick, charged with unspoken danger, until at last, one of them broke the stillness. Ben crouched down low, adopting a racing stance as if preparing for a marathon. "Run, run," he shouted, his voice echoing with urgency, startling Soul to her very core. Panic surged through her as she sprinted down the hallway, her heart pounding violently in her chest. The sound of Ben's heavy footsteps thumped behind her, each step closing the distance, pushing her to move faster. She reached the door to her and Romeo's room, flinging it open with all her might. It slammed shut behind her with a resounding bang, and she quickly turned the lock, her fingers trembling. Desperate for refuge, she crept over to the window, her breath coming in quick gasps. Outside, the scene was chaotic. Ben continued to pound on the door, each impact resonating against the wood like thunder, while his frantic voice pierced through the air. "Run! Run!" he yelled incessantly, the repetition intensifying her fear. Each shout felt like a command that demanded action, yet her body was paralyzed with dread. Her soul heart raced, thundering in her ears as she fought to regain control. She kept urging herself to move, to escape, climb through the window, do anything, but her limbs felt heavy as if they were encased in ice. She remained frozen, caught in a terrifying moment where the instinct to flee clashed with the overwhelming grip of fear. It was as if her body had betrayed her, surrendering control as if fate itself had gripped the pen and began scribbling her destiny without permission. Her muscles refused to respond, her knees buckling, heart hammering in her chest like a trapped bird. The room felt colder now, heavier, as though the air itself had thickened around her, pressing down on her skin like an invisible weight. The doorknob rattled violently. Then, crack. The door split open with a thunderous crack, splinters flying across the hardwood like shrapnel. Ben stepped through the broken frame, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the dimly lit room. Water trailed from his fingertips, dripping rhythmically onto the floor, each drop echoing like a ticking clock counting down to something terrible. His eyes locked onto her, predator eyes, sharp and daring, burning with intent. There was no hesitation in his stare, only a cold, deliberate hunger that cut through the space between them. She flinched violently, her body reacting before her mind could even process the danger. Her hand reached out, slamming against the windowpane for support. The glass was slick with condensation, and her palm left a trembling print behind. She tried to back away, her breath ragged, but in her panic, her foot tangled on something. The cord. A thin, worn electrical cord from the overhead lamp coiled loosely near the windowsill. Her heel caught it, just for a second, but it was enough. The lamp swayed above, casting warped shadows on the walls as her balance was lost. Time stretched in that brief instant, stretching long and thin like taffy, before gravity yanked her backward. She tumbled through the open window. Her body twisted mid-air, arms flailing, breath stolen from her lungs. She barely registered the cold rush of wind as she plummeted, heart caught in her throat. Then, smack. Her back collided with the unforgiving concrete below. The impact was brutal. A hollow, echoing thud reverberated through the narrow alleyway. Pain exploded through her spine and ribs, a flash of blinding white behind her eyes. The breath was knocked from her lungs with a sickening gasp, and for a moment, the world blurred into silence. Above her, the broken window framed Ben's silhouette. He leaned forward, placing both palms on the windowsill, his head tilting to the side in almost childlike curiosity. The moonlight hit his face just right, revealing the twisted glee curling at the corners of his mouth. And then, he laughed. A bright, unsettling sound that didn't match the moment at all. It was a joyful laugh, a sound that should have belonged at a summer carnival or a birthday party, not hanging in the stillness of a near tragedy. His smile widened, his white teeth flashing, innocence painted over cruelty. As he looked down at her crumpled body, unmoving, his expression was serene, as if balance had been restored. Like this was exactly how the story was always meant to go. The Vulu had perished, and in that tragic loss, they were finally freed. Broken from the shackles of a distorted reality, they transcended the confines of their existence. It was their grim destiny to face an agonizing end, only to be reborn anew, stronger, brighter, and more resilient than ever before, liberated from the oppressive weight of the world. In that fleeting moment between life and death, the two children, Romeo and Scarlett, experienced a profound awakening. They soared through the depths of their consciousness while their physical forms remained motionless, entangled in the stillness of their surroundings. As they traversed this ethereal realm, they began to unravel the intricate tapestry of existence. The essence of life, death, and the myriad complexities in between unfolded before their minds. They perceived the silent wisdom of the trees stretching toward the heavens, the rhythm of birds flocking overhead, and the remnants of family ties marred by pain, from the callous hand of their mother to the hauntingly absent figure of their father. Everything was new and jarring. Reality shifted like sand beneath their feet, a blend of authentic experiences and fleeting illusions. In that transcendent state, they grasped a profound truth. This life was merely a tiny fragment of their vast existence, while death represented a more substantial and intricate piece of the puzzle. They pondered whether one could truly fashion their personal heaven and hell from the fabric of their own consciousness. As fear ebbed away like waves retreating from the shore, an unusual sense of prosperity blossomed within them, akin to branches flourishing from the fertile earth. Once again, the mesmerizing blue flicker danced within their minds, elusive and enchanting. Romeo reached desperately to grasp it, yet it slipped through his fingers like mist. But Scarlett, with an innate understanding that seemed to flow through her, became attuned to its essence. She leaned closer and closer, her hands outstretched as they unfurled toward the radiant blue light, an embodiment of something greater that beckoned her forth. She saw a vision of a life that was different from her own, a life that didn't end in tragic death but was filled with undeniable hardships. As she lay on the ground, covered in her own blood, she realized this reality was a facade. All she could hear was Timothy calling her name, the sound lingering in her ears as she closed her eyes for the last time. She awoke with a profound sense of renewal, as if she had been reborn. It felt predestined, an event that was meant to unfold in this precise moment. There were no visible wounds, no blood, no dark bruises marring her skin, just a serene calm as her body floated on a splintered board across the restless, ominous expanse of the ocean. As the waves lapped gently around her, memories flooded her mind, vivid and haunting recollections she had never intended to revisit. Shadows of a past life, 16 years snatched away, resurfaced with startling clarity. She could recall moments that felt distant and yet intensely immediate, flashes of laughter, fragments of love, and echoes of pain. The black space of her mind haunted her, an abyss of nothingness that had beckoned her during the dark times, a place that felt both familiar and terrifying. And then, amidst the torrent of memories, one name rang out clearer than the rest: Timothy. The connection broke through the fog, a lifeline tethering her to a past that both sustained and tormented her. She could almost see his face, as the ocean stretched endlessly before her.